Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the director of the Demos think tank, Mackenzie, and the PR consultant, Alex Deane. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. The Mail's assessment of the election results is unflinching. Their headline, "The Day Boris Blew Up Labour." The Eye keeps things brief. Labour in turmoil, they say. The Guardian has a pretty similar headline, albeit with a few more words. The Financial Times attributes the Conservatives' success to what they call Johnson's vaccine bounce. The Times thinks the results could keep him in number 10 for a decade. The Telegraph leads with the Prime Minister ruling out another independence referendum, as it remained unclear whether the SNP would retain an outright majority at Holyrood. And the Sheffield Star is one of many local papers across the country focusing on the elections, in their case, the shift of the city's council from Labour to no overall control. In other news, the Mirror leads with a new line of inquiry from police investigating the murder of PCSO Julia James. And on a lighter note, The Sun has a story involving chef Jamie Oliver and a stolen tractor. And we're joined tonight by Mackenzie and Alex Deane. Good evening to you both. Well, a bumper crop of papers covering the election. Let's kick off, Polly, with the Mail, which has this photograph of Boris Johnson with a giant inflatable version of himself, which is across many of the papers. And the headline, "The Day Boris Blew Up Labour."
It's intriguing. There's something about this balloon looks like Boris's brother Joe Johnson to me, but it was inflated in Hartlepool by supporters of Boris Johnson to welcome him. He said he was going to go from jabs, jabs, jabs to jobs, jobs, jobs. And it's really, there's no question this is a devastating day for the Labour Party. Massive, almost astonishing success, really, for a Conservative Party that has basically been in power for 11 years, but has this extraordinary ability to reinvent itself, to distance itself from both the Theresa May administration and the David Cameron administration, be completely fresh and new, and to be arguing that change is needed, change is coming, which is a narrative you'd expect from the opposition. We're getting it from the incumbent, is our really extraordinary results. And it's because the Conservative Party, as I say, has this ability to adapt to changing circumstance. They are going to the north and talking about public spending and jobs in a way that you would have seen from the Labour Party in the 1970s. If they can pull it off and maintain that electoral coalition, then, it's quite hard to see what the Labour Party is going to do to oust them. Certainly not on the results of tonight. Is it going to happen soon?
And Alex, after the 2019 election, Boris Johnson had talked about being loaned votes from red wall seats. Is it now looking like a more permanent shift?
Yeah, that's what a number of commentators have been suggesting this bout of results might lead us to conclude, that some of these votes are actually indicative of a broader political shift where the Labour Party's move towards a younger, more urban vote and losing some of their working class vote. That's actually a transition that isn't just about one election. It's a more long-term move. And of course, the problem for them is that no matter how much you might like the idea of a young, trendy urban vote, there aren't enough of them to compensate for the loss of your working class voters. And I think the Mail's got it about right here. That the Prime Minister has dealt a terrible blow to the Labour Party. I would, Sarah, though, say one thing about that from my perspective. I've fought elections, I've won them and lost them, and it's a horrible thing to happen when you lose an election. And one of the things that Keir Starmer's going to have to deal with is that he's now got hundreds of activists and hundreds of councillors desperately disappointed to have been slung out on their ear unceremoniously yesterday. And many of them will regard it as having been no fault of their own that they lost their seats. Very difficult for a party to manage that.
Yeah, let's have a look at the Eye, Labour in turmoil, the headline there, quoting Keir Starmer, admitting that the party's lost the trust of working people. So who is responsible for this? Keir Starmer, Alex, saying he takes full responsibility. Where did it go wrong? I mean, one thing that he has done today is managed to unite Peter Mandelson and John McDonnell, the left and the right of the party, on the fact that there is no vision.
Sure. No, I thought the McDonnell attack was actually pretty good. Basically, then if you're in opposition, then oppose was the line from McDonnell, and you can't send out your activists and your campaigners without a clear policy message. And I think that's going to sting. People expect a kind of Corbynite attack. You're not far left enough, and people will be ready to dismiss that. The cleverer attacks now being mounted on Keir Starmer, I think, are landing more significant blows as a result of being a bit more reasonable than just, let's be a bit more left wing and say that if you don't agree with us, you could just push off and join the Tories. But Sarah, you used the phrase that Keir Starmer used. He said he wanted to take full responsibility, which seems to extend to him taking responsibility up to and not including the point where he takes responsibility for anything. I mean, in the end, it seems that deputy heads will roll. And we're going to have a cabinet reshuffle a shadow cabinet reshuffle quite soon, where Keir Starmer moves around the chess pieces. I'm afraid one conclusion from this episode may be that no matter the qualities of the individual and no matter how bad luck it is, sometimes it's just not your turn. It's just not going to be your time. Michael Howard, whatever other people think of him, I think would have been a perfectly good Prime Minister of this country. It just wasn't to be in the political cycle of the day. And therefore, that eminent QC did not get to become Prime Minister and wasn't leader of his party for very long. I fear that may well be the case for Keir Starmer.
Yeah, The Guardian also describing Labour in turmoil after the Tories inflict huge defeats, Polly. When Alex talks about the timing, Peter Mandelson today said the two Cs were the reason here, COVID and Corbyn. Is Jeremy Corbyn still genuinely a factor here? And when we're talking about coronavirus, is that the reason why Sir Keir Starmer has failed to cut through?
I think there's no question that, a lockdown pandemic year has been more difficult than most in which to make his mark as a leader. You had to oppose a bit, but equally, especially in the early months of the pandemic, you couldn't just oppose. That wasn't the public mood. It wasn't the right thing to do. But of course, Labour's problems are so much more deep and also so much more complicated than that. You rightly asked the question, whose fault is this? And there are so many people. There is the question of what Corbyn did in terms of both factionalism, a far left set of policies, very alienating to lots of groups of voters. There's also what the left used to criticise is the way Blair realigned the party away from working class needs and working class priorities in lots of ways. And that has a legacy as well. It's why Liberal Democrats grew as a party. Obviously, that then stalled after 2010. It's why the Greens have risen as a party. Lots of those votes went to UKIP from the Labour Party and have now gone on to the Conservatives and not going back. So Blair has a legacy, Corbyn has a legacy. There's what Miliband did in changing the party. It's so complicated. And the problem is that means that every faction can say it's someone else's fault. And what Starmer isn't doing, it seems, is pulling together with a vision and saying, this is the thing, back me or sack me, follow, this is the way the victory lies. Instead, he's trying to just, a bit like Charles Kennedy used to do in the Liberal Democrat Party, just be a chairman, a holder together of all of the factions, which I don't think is enough from the leader of the political party.
So a period of soul-searching, but soul-searching doesn't win you elections, does it? And the clock is ticking for Keir Starmer, Alex.
That's right. And I think too, Sarah, that one of the things he's going to face is that as you get closer towards an election, some people who might absolutely agree with your ideological position start thinking that they're going to lose their seats. And on this current trend, if these numbers were anything like reproduced at a general election, we'd be seeing a number of Labour MPs being turfed out of seats they've held, in some cases, for a very long time. And at that point, people think to themselves, doesn't matter how much I believe in you as an individual, doesn't matter how much I like you, if that's relevant at all. If you're going to lose me my seat, then I'm going to change my position. And that's something that Keir Starmer is going to have to face up to and think about. I mean, God, I know Polly is saying, but you actually are going some if you try and blame Tony Blair for these results. In the end, the buck stops with the leader of the party. And it has to go beyond words, I think, for people to understand that he really gets the fact it ain't going somewhere thus far. And also, Boris Johnson has campaigned very well here. Some people in the media don't like him. Lots of people in social media don't like him. Just another reminder that neither social media nor mainstream media are actually real life, and they don't determine how people vote.
OK, we're going to take a short pause, but don't go away because lots more analysis are coming up. It is a prospect that will divide opinion. But could Boris Johnson be in Downing Street for a decade? We'll be discussing that next.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that is the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Her arms, look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Once it takes a hold, it's very, very difficult for these firefighters to get a grip of it and get on top of it and put it out. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me, Polly Mackenzie and Alex Deane. Polly, I want to turn to the Times now and pick up on the point that Alex was making just before the break about Boris Johnson dividing opinion, but in the Times he's eyeing up a decade in power.
Yeah, I mean, we can't foresee the future, but we can expect, I think, that he will certainly win another election on this basis. You know, the 2019 election, which secured him that sort of almost surprise 80 majority, in a way, Labour has recovered a tiny bit of that tonight. They're saying that the swing is kind of between 2 and 3% from the Conservatives to Labour. But we need to see far more than that if the Labour Party, which, of course, has been basically still ousted from Scotland, has any chance of winning a majority. And if Boris Johnson has this magic, which the Conservatives have been seeking, you know, George Osborne said the Conservative strategy was to go after North. Theresa May said the Conservative strategy was to go after the North. it's only Boris Johnson who's been able to pull it off. So whether you like him or not, what is the pathway for him not spending a decade in power? I think that's what people who would like him to lose need to, start thinking about.
And Alex, we must talk about Scotland, potentially constitutionally highly significant. So far looking good for Nicola Sturgeon. But according to the Telegraph, the PM will not grant her Scottish referendum.
Yes, because in the end, it's up to the Westminster Parliament to allow a referendum to take place in part of our country that would be legally binding or not. And it's for the Prime Minister and the government of the day to make that decision. And in the end, I think Boris Johnson, whatever his merits or demerits, would run terrified of being the Prime Minister who oversaw the breakup of the United Kingdom. So I entirely understand the position that he's taken here, and he's seized a moment of real high watermark political support in order to express it. He might, if he wants to go on and think about the next things and legacy and so forth, think about other constitutional issues. First and foremost, getting the boundary changes through that mean that future elections are fought on fairer guidelines than the ones that we've been fighting of late, which are pretty skewed. But first and foremost, keeping the union together has got to be number one on the job statement of any Prime Minister.
But if, Polly, there is a pro-independence majority in Scotland, which looks likely, then the people have spoken. It's not about Boris Johnson granting a referendum or not. It's the will of the people having their say.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to continue withholding consent for a referendum, but we did have one pretty recently. And, Brexit is still kind of, whilst obviously it's happened, there's still lots of kind of transitional experiences that we're going through to settle, trade negotiations. I think for Scotland to make that decision before really the dust has settled around Brexit would be a mistake, because it is still a kind of ongoing constitutional challenges there. But, Boris Johnson, in my view, hasn't prioritised the union enough, because he put a sea border down the Irish Sea. And we know that we are in a mess in Northern Ireland with, again, constitutional difficulties there because he's been cavalier.
OK, Polly, Alex, thanks very much indeed.